welcome to your Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners Land Use Meeting. Will everyone please rise for the pledge and invocation given by our chaplain, Commissioner Stacy White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Heavenly Father, I pray that you will guide this board, our staff, and stakeholders as we make important decisions about land use this morning. I pray, Lord, that you will see to it that each and every board member here looks at things through the lens of private property rights, but also through the lens of creating the best community that we can possibly have, and that we keep both of those issues in balance. Lord, as always, I pray for members of our armed forces and our first responders, that you will keep them safe, guide them each and every day, deliver them home safely. I ask for all of these things in your heavenly name. Amen.
Thank you, Commissioner White. Mr. Moretta, changes to the agenda.
Good morning, Commissioners. Joe Moretta, Development Services, for the record. We do have changes to the agenda, starting on agenda page 11, item E-07, personal appearance 19-0937. Staff has requested this item be continued to August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. Commissioners, also, our change sheet reflects that there are no commissioner items. There, in fact, is one. It's in the agenda listed as item J1. Moving to the agenda itself on page 2 of 13, I'll make additional announcements. A1, personal appearance 19-0529. This application is out of order, is being continued to the August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. Item A2, personal appearance 19-0729. This application is being continued to the August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. Item A3, personal appearance 19-0757. This application has been withdrawn. Item A4, personal appearance 19-0778. This application is being continued to the August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. Item A5, personal appearance 19-0781. This application is out of order, is being continued to August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. Item A6, personal appearance 19-0955. This application has been, the applicant has withdrawn the application. Item A7, personal appearance 18-1236. Application has been continued by the staff to August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. Item A8, DRI 19-0109. This application is being continued to the August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. Item A9, vacating petition V19-0006. The applicant is requesting a continuance to the August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. And finally, item A3, rezoning 18-0996. Staff is requesting a continuance to the August 13th board meeting starting at 9 a.m. That concludes the changes.
Move the changes.
Motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Merman to approve the changes to the agenda. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner White to approve the consent agenda. Seeing no further discussions, please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Anyone here for a B item? Anyone for a B item that was on the consent agenda? Your item has been approved. It's been approved. Anyone who intends to present testimony, evidence, or otherwise be heard on any matter scheduled for today's consideration at today's meeting, please stand and raise your right hand for the clerk to swear you in.
Okay. All right. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Mr. Moretta.
Thank you, Commissioners. This brings us to the vacatings. Items C1, C2, and C3 will be presented by the Real Estate Department.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Alicia Alvarez with Geospatial and Land Acquisitions Department. Item C1 today is Vacate V190016. This is a petition by Melinda and Lawrence Amon to vacate a portion of a 15-foot wide platted utility easement lying within lots 43 and 44, Block 2, Plat of Apollo Beach, Unit 1, Part 2, as recorded in Plat Book 34, page 41 of the Public Records of Hillsborough County. The petition request is made for the purpose of building a home. The proposed vacate is located south of Gulf and Sea Boulevard and north of U.S. Highway 41 in Apollo Beach. The petition was routed to appropriate departments and agencies, and there are no objections to the vacate. Staff recommends approval of this petition.
What's your pleasure? Motion by Commissioner Murphy, second by Commissioner White.
This
to
is-
approve item C1.
This is a public hearing.
I'm sorry, it's a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item C1, trying to get us out of here.
Roll out long.
Anyone wishing to address item C1? As I said, no one wants to talk about it. I have a motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner White to approve item C1. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Loretta.
Brings us to item C2. The Real Estate Department will present this item.
Vacate item V190019. This petition is brought by Ramon Castillo to vacate a portion of a 5-foot wide platted easement lying within Lot 11 and part of Lot 12 of Block A, Plat of Pinecrest Villa, Addition Number 1, as recorded in Plat Book 14, page 40 of the Public Records of Hillsborough County. This petition request is made for the purpose of resolving an encroachment created when a structure was built onto the utility easement. The proposed vacate area is located south of Waters Avenue and north of West Broad Street in Tampa. The petition was routed to appropriate departments and agencies, and there were no objections to vacation of this easement. Staff recommends approval of this petition.
This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item C2? Anyone wishing to address item C2? Motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner Kemp to approve item C2. Seeing no further discussion. I'm sorry, Commissioner White, you're recognized. I apologize.
When was that structure built?
Commissioner, I'm not sure that we know exactly when it was built. It was built without permits, and so it needs to go through the after-the-fact permitting process. As part of that permitting process, we identify easements, so they couldn't get a permit for the structure in the easements, but we're not sure.
Has it been built recently, like in the past couple years? Are we talking decades back, or?
I don't know the specific of when it was built. It does appear to be an added-on utility-type building that looks like it has been there for a bit of time.
Got it. I remember back when we were trying to resolve the issue of the subdivision where some of the structures, some of the homes were built into the setbacks and whatnot, and yeah, I just wish there's some way that we could just get a message out that, you know, we can't just have folks building in setbacks and right-of-ways and things, and then we just go and remedy it, you know, through rezoning process and otherwise, yeah, so.
So, Commissioner, for these items, I hear you.
I'm gonna be
and we do
voting
that-
in
yes.
favor of this one, but I just, you know, I just saw this as an opportunity to just say, we probably need to broadcast that message across the board,
I think-
countywide.
I agree,
So-
and we will get that word out. One of the things the board does see a lot of these is vacation of utility easements. There are utility easements platted as a matter of course in neighborhoods and subdivisions, and when they're not used, it's not necessarily evident to the property owner that there's a utility easement back there if there's not a power line or something. But yes, we agree that we would really like these things to come in the right way and get permitted and identified before the fact. We will work to get that word out.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Merman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think the question also begs another question about the activity of unlicensed contractors. that may do these type of structures. And, you know, we've discussed this here at the board many, many times. Do you know if this was done by somebody that was unlicensed?
We don't know whether it was done by an unlicensed contractor or not. I will say that we do see easements, these utility easements. There are numerous instances where we get after-the-fact permitting requirements where they're just not properly identified on the plans that come in. So that it's potential that there are cited and, you know, they're permitted properly, but they don't identify utility easement. And then it's later picked up. A lot of times title companies will pick these up and say, hey, there's a structure that's located in this easement here that needs to be resolved. And that is a lot of what you do see in these vacating. There are some that are just, you know, a little bit more, less innocuous than that, and they certainly are ones that we put attention to. But unlicensed contracting is something that we do contract with the sheriff's office on, and we do have affirmative efforts underway to
Because I still want to clamp down on that. I think that's part of the problem we have with a lot of different issues. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for raising these points. I think it's important, and maybe not just to broadcast, because that just doesn't seem to be working, although this could predate that. But unless the board does, I think, something more than that, I can't see this changing. And I'm just wondering, I mean, this is not something that only happens in Hillsborough County. So I'm wondering if there's some best practices about how to best deal with this in other places. I don't know if that involves, you know, once this comes to the attention, you know, I'm not sure what that involves, and like an additional fine about it, or, you know, what could possibly be done besides just broadcasting and then being hit with it after the fact. And because I you know, I do think it's concerning, and I'm just think it would be good for staff to investigate that and look at that.
Yeah, as Commissioner, we certainly can, and the after-the-fact permitting you referenced does come with an additional permitting fee with it. That is something we haven't done, but it has been some time since we looked at what kind of incentives or disincentives we can add to the process, and we will look at what other jurisdictions are doing with this issue, particularly structures being built in areas encumbered by easements or right-of-way.
A lot of these things have happened and continue to happen specifically in Palm River area. I've run across a lot of it.
Yeah.
What is it that you can bring us back in the next month or two that could address it? Something you can bring us back to, at least let us have something that we can look at?
Certainly, we can bring back our, so the challenge with these is if we have things like utility easements in a backyard that from a homeowner standpoint looks like a backyard, and you start using it as a backyard, they're mowing it, and they start putting things in it, and next thing you know, they'd have a utility shed and maybe some other building just becomes part of what they have on their lot. That has, in years past, not been something that has systematically been attention brought to it. The way title companies are looking at properties now, those things are being identified much more, as well as unpermitted structures. So a lot of these are coming to light. So we do have an existing body of these things that are existing right now. So the solutions to those are to bring them into compliance or remove them. And the compliance would be either through the vacating process and permitting, or really what we're I think the best opportunity we have is to look to not proliferate these in the future. I think for those that will be coming to you, there will be cases where there's what we can do is some heightened penalty or restriction, or on the other hand, take it and try to have some facilitative process for those that are existing right now in the innocent, unknowing homeowner situation. So I could bring back both of those kind of options of how we can try to systematically reach out and address these that are existing and look to dissuade them from proliferating in the future. If that suits what you're looking for.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
Commissioner Overman, you recognize.
Thank you. I'm curious what triggers this oftentimes. Is it the homeowners in the process of selling the property and suddenly now there's a survey? Are the utilities required to put some kind of indication that there's a utility easement? Because it is oftentimes, when you buy the property, you don't exactly look at the plat every single time you
Right.
go to build
Right,
something on your home when you've been there 10 years. But when you go to sell it, I would assume, or if you're going to change something, then it becomes more obvious. And that's the challenge was it triggered by a sale or a potential sale of the property?
It was, I don't know the specifics on this one, but it would be a sale or maybe some other permitting activity that identifies a non-conforming situation on the property. It is a lot of times a sale or refinancing or something that brings about some review of the title and what's on the land and any, unidentified encumbrances that could come with the land. That is how a lot of these do get identified currently.
Okay, because it does seem, it's not always obvious when you're looking at a piece of property,
That's the
where the
challenge.
utility easement is, especially it's on the back of your property. It's running down the lane in this particular case. I would imagine it's kind of difficult to figure out that you've got, cable and electric and or whatever underground oftentimes.
Or at least the ability to put it there. It may not actually be there.
Be
The
there,
vacating
yeah.
that do come to you, there are no actual utilities there, or else it wouldn't come to the board to be vacated.
Right, okay, great, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve item C2. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
C3.
C3 will be presented by the Real Estate Department.
Vacate petition V190020. This petition is brought by 12902 South 301 Highway LLC to vacate a portion of a platted utility easement lying within the lots of 1 and 2, Block 1, Plat of Riverview Country Estate Number 1, Unit Number 1, as recorded in Plat Book 40, page 90 of the Public Records of Hillsborough County. This petition request is made for the purpose of resolving an encroachment created when a structure was built onto the utility easement. The proposed vacate area is located east of US Highway 301 and south of Dixon Drive in Riverview. The petition was routed to appropriate departments and agencies, and there were no objections to the vacation of this easement. Staff recommends approval of this petition.
This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item C3? Anyone wishing to address item C3? Motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner Kemp to approve item C3. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Mr. Beretta.
This brings us to item C4. Real Estate Department will also present this item.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Carrie Allen, Geospatial and Land Acquisition Services Department. Item C4 is Vacate ID V190021. This is a petition by Betty L. Williams and Jeffrey J. Nassy as trustee of the Stephen N. Stanford Family Trust Agreement dated April 13, 2001. This is to vacate a portion of a 50-foot wide unimproved deeded right-of-way known as North Street. This was created in Deed Book 1245, page 247 of the Public Records of Hillsborough County. A portion of North Street was vacated in 2006. This petition is being filed to vacate an additional portion of land that was left out of the previous vacating petition due to a surveying error. The proposed vacate area is located north of Lovegren Lane, east of North US Highway 41 in Gibsonton. The petition was routed to appropriate departments and agencies, and there are no objections to the vacation of this portion of right-of-way. Staff recommends approval of this petition request.
This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item C4? Anyone wishing to address item C4? Motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner Overman to approve item C4. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Thank you. Mr. Beretta.
Thank you, Commissioners. This brings us to item E1. This is a personal appearance of a planned development for a minor modification. This is 19-0543. This public hearing was initially opened by the board and continued for another public hearing today related to a RV Park, which is located at 12500 McMullen Loop Road in the Riverview South Shore Community Plan area. Commissioners, if you'll recall, the discussion really essentially focused on an area of the site plan where the current site plan shows structure placement for RV models essentially 300 feet away from the western property line. It involves clustering that area and moving it closer to the western property line by approximately 100 feet. The project is being driven, and the applicant, well, I'm sure will provide more detail, the project is being driven by other improvements. The site is divided up into an upper, middle, and lower area. The project is being improved in other areas. They're removing approximately 6 units from the flood area. They're also improving drives, which are requiring a wider width. They're attempting to bring the code into compliance in the areas of the park that were permitted several years ago prior to what the code requires now. And through that, they found they need additional area. That additional area moving to the west of the site is also constrained by wetland areas. As they've gone out and they've found more specific delineations of the wetlands, they found that these areas are somewhat constrained in terms of limiting their expansion in a way that can occur and maintain the same structure placement 300 feet away from the western property line. However, when staff evaluated this, we recognized the fact that within that area where the 300 feet resides, there's a significant area of tree growth and understory growth. Within that area, the applicant is proposing to maintain a 100-foot buffer, which is different from the last time this public hearing was heard, and they're also adding 10 feet to that area and committing to that all as a buffer. The difference between a buffer and a setback is the buffer area cannot be used for things like paths or active areas of the site. So no structures could be placed there, no paths could be placed there, no, for example, like recreational amenities could be placed there. So it'll be an inactive area, and it will also include the trees and the understory. If there's going to be any tree replacement in the future, it would have to go through a permitting process to remove that tree and then replace it. If it's a protected tree, the condition would allow, however, removal of invasive species. Staff also visited the site, our natural resources visited the site, and also our zoning planning staff has visited the site to verify the fact that there is a significant tree growth. We feel that the tree growth and understory growth in the area offsets the impacts that would be generated by moving the structure placements or the RV space placements closer to the western property line. Staff is recommending approval, and we're available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant here? Good morning.
Good morning.
Have
Dan
all of
Gibbs.
you been sworn in?
Yes.
Okay. You have 15 minutes.
Okay, thanks. My name's Dan Gibbs with Atwell Engineering, 1800 Parkway Place, Marietta, Georgia. I have Scott Griffin with me from Atwell as well, and Bill Dietz is the Regional Vice President for Sun Communities. Just giving you guys a little high-level background on this project. It was impacted by Hurricane Irma, a lot of flooding at the site, damaged much of the lower areas so that they were not usable anymore. That was the plan that we presented to you guys last year that was approved, was to kind of redevelop that area and as well as the upper area to improve the park. It was an old park that Sun acquired back in 2016, very rundown and dilapidated. Sun Communities is one of the top RV park operators in the country. They've acquired the site. They're trying to do whatever they can to try and fix it up, make it nice again, bring all these sites up to code, which has been an extensive process. We've currently met with adjacent property owners to kind of discuss their issues since the last meeting, as well as kind of explain our reasoning. We understand their concerns, but there's also limited space on this site for us to be able to make the improvements to bring it up to the county code requirements and still keep the sites that we need, the number of sites that are allowed on this site in order for it to be a feasible project for us to develop. In doing so, you know, we're expanding the lot sizes, we're expanding the road sizes, we are avoiding a lot of wetland areas on the site. In any places where we're impacting trees, you know, we're still, the one area that he talked about that's 100 feet is still 4 times wider than what the required setback is for that area. Like you said, staff has been out to the site, reviewed all the trees to see the kind of canopy cover that we have there. They were shown in the pictures and some of the presentations that were presented to you guys. It's still, you know, very wooded area right there, an extreme buffer that's between our development and adjacent property owners. So, you know, we're trying to do the best we can with the limited space that is available on the site, as well as bringing it up to the code for everything that's required for the county. You know, we're all available for any questions from the commissioners or from the public as well. I'd like to save any remaining time just to, you know, address any comments that anybody else has.
Okay, anyone else? We have 12 minutes left. Anyone else?
We're good.
Okay, thank you very much. Move down to public hearing. Is there any proponents that would like to address item E1? Any proponents? Any opponents wishing to address item E1? Hold on. Good morning. Have you been sworn in?
Yes.
Okay, sir, you have 15 minutes as an opponent.
Good morning. Thanks for letting me talk today. My name is Donald Mann. I'm the Vice President of our HOA board for the River Place community, which is directly next door to where this project has been
Hold on.
proposed.
Staff, could you pull that microphone up for me a little bit, please? Thank you.
Sure. I just have a couple things to add for concerns from our community. We're a small, quiet community of about 70 plus houses. We are directly next door to the RV resort. The main thing I want to talk to you today is just kind of the drainage issues that we've been having in our community that kind of come from the wetland area from where our property is versus the RV resort. We've got about 23 homeowners that back up to the border where this RV resort is. And we've had issues with drainage from the wetland area in our community. So the concern is if you start cutting down the wetland, the conservation area, that's going to increase the drainage problems that we've had in our community. The second thing that I'd like to talk to you about is kind of speed control measures. We only have one access road that goes into our community. It dead ends into the RV resort, and we're right there next to them. There is one speed limit sign for 25 miles per hour at the bottom of a hill. Our communities are at the bottom of a hill. A lot of residents from their community tend to, as they're going down the hill, tend to just fly right by that speed sign. We've got a couple of houses on the hill that have small children, and it's a concern if we're going to be adding additional RV spots to the RV resort, it's going to increase this traffic. People aren't going to pay attention to the speed limit, and it could create more of a problem. That's all I have today. I know Ms. DeBose has a couple things to add as well.
Good morning. Have you been sworn in?
Good morning. Yes. I had submitted an
Please state your-
objection.
please state your name.
Eileen Dubus, and I live in the community, River Place. And I had submitted objections and appeared before the commission at the May 7th hearing. And I want to say that I do continue my objection right now, but I do have some comments and questions that might help the commission and our community, you know, feel better about this project. I recall from the minutes that Commissioner White had said, you know, told them to come back with plans that don't so much cut into the setback and would address the flooding issues. So I would like to ask if I can ask questions of the engineer to have them explain, you know, what's different about this new application versus, you know, the continued application versus what was presented at May 7th hearing. And I also have concern about the approval that Mr. Moreta mentioned, that there would be conditions and they would not be able, some communities would not be able to cut into this buffer area, which we would find comforting, except that I find that that's not what's written in the July 12th staff report that is posted. I just saw it on Optics on Friday. The July 12th staff report was a revision of the July 11th report. And from how I'm reading it and what I redlined by looking at the document, several conditions requiring approval from this commission were struck. So when we went from the July 11th to the July 12th report, it struck the requirements to present changes to the commission. So for example, the section they were talking about with the buffer is, well, they talk about the setback, the minimum 25-foot setback, which is number 6. And it said that any change to the setback shall require a PRS application to be decided by the Board of County Commissioners. That was July 11th. That was struck from the July 12th. And it also talks about the western and northern boundaries, but it says any change to the screening requirement around the vegetation would require approval. That was struck. And then the key one that I find in 7B, and I have a red line if you wanted to see it, it talked about the 100-foot wide buffer that Mr. Moreta mentioned, and I think Mr. Griffin, and that's supposed to be untouched, except for if they had to remove something that was, invasive. It states in 7B in July 11th report, any change to this condition shall require a PRS application to be decided by the Board of County Commissioners. That is deleted in the July 12th staff report that's recommending approval with conditions. So it seems that, we understand that they need to move some lots and they're trying to improve the community, but again, our concern is that buffer area is flooding, and the fact that if they don't need approval, can they just move in as far as they want? Because I had a conversation with Mr. Griffin and Mr. Whites from Sun Communities when they asked to speak with me on a teleconference, and Mr. Whites indicated that he thought they could do whatever they wanted with their property. And he even stated to me, we could go up to your fence line if we wanted to, which we know from Ms. Heinrich, they can't. They have to keep the minimum of 25 feet, but they're saying for the purpose of this project and to address our concerns, they would keep 100. Yet the condition to get this commission's approval, if they want to change that 100 feet, has been struck from the report. And that's my biggest concern and why I'm still objecting.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Applicant, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal.
Mr. Chairman.
Hold on.
I'll let staff kind of address the items that she was talking about between July 11th and July 12th, stuff, because I think it's just some of the wording and everything, but I'll let them kind of explain that. In regards to the stormwater issues that the gentleman was referring to, their site is upstream of ours. Everything kind of drains from their site down through ours. And I realize when you get some rains that you can have some backups and stuff from the wetland areas, but our site has already gone through kind of the review process with the county. We've added additional stormwater ponds to kind of address, all of the stormwater down in that area, any kind of flooding, all the requirements that are required by the county and water management district have been addressed. Again, that water kind of flows through there. If any problems are out there, it should alleviate those, if anything, or they're going to stay like what they are. It's not going to change anything. We're not developing that far to the west on that property area. As far as the speed concerns, we are not adding additional traffic out here to the site. We are keeping the same number that we were currently allowed to have, that the site's currently approved for. We're also adding a gated entrance, which will, ideally allow people to slow down before they get down there, so they know that they're going to have to stop. So I think between those two issues, they should also address his traffic concerns as well. I'm trying to think what Ms. Dubus was asking about. I mean the buffer areas, we're staying 100 feet away. That's 4 times what the setback is right there. It's understory trees. It's regular tree cover. We're not clearing anything. If they ever do want to be able to go back and change anything in that area, it has to come back before you guys at the commission again for any kind of approvals in there. So I think we've tried to address all of their comments.
Okay, thank you. Does staff have any comments they want to make on this?
Just to clarify on the buffer, I'm sorry, Michelle's going to speak to the buffer condition, but the intent of there is to keep the trees, existing vegetation, and understory vegetation in its natural existing state.
Okay.
Good morning, Michelle Heinrich, Development Services. Just to recap on some of the questions brought up by the citizens who came to speak, what we wanted to make sure the board is aware of is the major changes between the previous proposal and the current proposal is that they are giving 10 more feet of setback. Before they were proposing a 90-foot setback. They've increased that to 100. And additionally, previously we did not have any commitment from the applicant, which they're making now, and even furthering that today, which is to keep that area vegetated, regulate that as a buffer, meaning you would not be able to have any structures or any amenities in that area. And as you heard Mr. Wormley say, not only are they agreeable to the condition that states the trees shall be left intact, they're also agreeing to add in the understory. And again, of course, we want to have in the condition the ability that if there was any invasive species or diseased tree that would pose a safety hazard, that of course up to natural resources would be able to be removed. So that is the primary differences between the two approvals, and that in addition to the additional evidence or information that they gave us justifying the reasons for the relocated spaces and the reasons for the proposed layout being more of an inverted P. Staff reviewed that thoroughly, and we do still recommend approval. I'm available if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Smith, you recognize.
Thank you. So one of the biggest concerns to me seems to be the issue of flooding. And, you know, with the applicant saying their site had flooded, but the water goes through. And I mean, you can see there's a huge floodway through their property. But yeah, the way I understand it is that this proposal is taking sites out of the wetlands and out of the floodway, so that there will that would improve any drainage and flooding problem.
That's correct. As part of their proposed improvements to the site, they would be removing six lots from the existing floodway and moving them to a non-floodway portion of the site. So that would be, we view that as an improvement. It is an improvement in that it would remove potential for obstructions in that floodway, which is good for the all-around drainage.
And I'm not an engineer, but I'm inclined to believe them by looking at the site plan and see if you would confirm this, that it looks like the water from the neighborhood actually would drain through this floodway.
Whether that neighborhood may have internal stormwater, but yeah, the general flow of water would be to the, in this case, to the east.
So right, so you know, just to give comfort to the neighborhood, I think this would, if anything, improve flooding issues.
We believe this would be a net improvement to the area from a flood standpoint, in that it would be removing obstructions from the floodway.
And
net benefit.
the other thing, the second thing is, of course, the buffer, that they've always enjoyed a very large buffer, but as the applicant pointed out, it's only 25 feet would be required here. And I was very impressed that your staff and actually went out and checked the state of the vegetation, and that there is enough natural vegetation. Did you get that confirmed by Natural Resources as well?
Yes, we confirmed both that the existing vegetation was viable and could remain its current state with a 100-foot width, that it was sufficient to provide a screen to the neighborhood, and that there was not an overabundance of invasives in there that would kind of gut the area. So those all have been confirmed, and we believe that this provides an appropriate buffer and screen to that neighborhood to the west.
And right, so it's not just a bunch of the Brazilian pepper, it really is a functioning vegetative buffer. So thank you very much. I mean, with that, and with the increase that the applicant has given, and those stronger conditions, that will now remain a buffer instead of a setback, I'm feeling a lot better about supporting this project. Thank you.
Commissioner Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you. I have the questions about the conditions that they said. I'm still confused. were in July 11th and out July 12th, that in order to, as I understood it, as it was said, and I didn't hear it addressed, that the buffer could be minimized without approval of this board, like administratively, or, okay, can you just
No.
address? Because
Okay,
that's
yes.
what,
I'll let Ms.
uh-huh.
I'll let Ms.
I just
Heinrich
wanted to
address that.
understand.
Thank you.
Certainly, Michelle Hiring, Development Services. Mr. Bose is correct. When we originally filed our staff report, we did have conditions in there outlining the process, which you're all aware of, that with the PD, changes can be proposed, and of course, that is at the discretion of the Board of County Commissioners. That is the information that was in there. Upon further review, it was deemed that that was probably not appropriate, given the fact that it's a repeat of the process, which we typically don't include in our conditions. So therefore, we felt it was better just to include the information that was necessary and not repeat any code references or processes.
Thank you. So to be clear, especially for the neighborhood, what this would mean is a 100-foot buffer is a 100-foot buffer. There's no way that come a year from now, they could apply for, or in some internal operation, get an administrative waiver and make it 75 feet or 50 feet.
That's correct. It's a 100-foot buffer, and a 100-foot buffer will be required unless it's changed by this board.
Okay,
Future board.
thank you.
It's a specifically referenced condition, so it's clear in the Land Development Code requires that any change to a specifically approved condition by the board would require a public hearing. So that is the process.
Commissioner White, you recognize.
Well, my question was answered by Commissioner Kemp's line of questioning, just to be sure that this is memorialized as a zoning condition, that it would require board approval to change at any point in the future. It's a 100-foot buffer, native vegetation, as I understand it. Some lots have been eliminated from the original proposal. So as I see it, we have that balance that I described in my invocation this morning, right? Between private property rights and making the best community we can possibly have. I do believe strongly this is a net benefit for the neighbors. So with that being said, I'll move the item.
Let's go motion by Commissioner White. Oh, what? Yes, I did. I have a motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Kemp to approve item E1. See no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Mr. Moretta.
This brings us to E2. It's a personal appearance 19-0762. This is a minor modification to a plan development. Plan development is located on North Dale Mabry on the east side, just south of Zambito Road. This a proposal to allow the structure height to exceed 25 feet to a maximum of 36 feet. It will still be a one-story structure. However, the applicant is making this request based on providing architectural components to the building and needing the additional height. Staff is recommending approval with conditions.
Morning, have you been sworn in?
Yes, I have. Good morning, Commissioners. My name's David Wright, P.O. Box 1016, Tampa, Florida 33601. Like Mr. Moretta said, this is a request to increase the height of the building. This is just for the front facade, and it's just for architectural detailing. We're not requesting any increase in the intensity or the FAR of the building. I'm here to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. This is a public hearing. Any proponents wishing to address item E2? Any proponents? Any opponents wishing to address item E2? Any opponents? You waive your rebuttal time? Smart move. We have a motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner Kemp to approve item E2. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Mr. Moretta.
Thank you. This brings us to item E3, personal appearance 19-0773. This is a minor modification located at 75 feet west of the intersection of U.S. Highway 301 and Rice Creek Drive. This is a modification to a private recreational use to modify the number and size of soccer fields from 6 half-size fields to 4 large fields, reconfigure the field layout, added 25-foot high safety net. Staff has reviewed this, and we are recommending approval with conditions, And I would add that staff is also recommending a new condition that the applicant is aware of, and we're handing this out. It's condition 1.2, which indicates all parking for the facility shall be provided on site. Off-site parking shall be prohibited. Staff is recommending approval with conditions, and we're available if you have questions.
Good morning again. David Wright, P.O. Box 1016, Tampa, Florida 33601. We are in agreement with the additional condition that was requested by staff. I would just like to add that this is a reduction in the intensity. We're going from 6 soccer fields to 4 soccer fields. I would like to make one correction to something Mr. Moretta said. These are not full-size soccer fields. These fields are intended for games to be played by 3-on-3 and 5-on-5 sides against each other. There will be no referees, no coaches, and no spectators. We have not provided any space for in between the fields for anybody to congregate and watch these games. So it's just for people to show up, play their games, and leave. The parking, I can confirm, is based on the LDC requirement of 1 space per 30% of the max capacity of the open uses. And I'm here to answer any additional questions.
Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing. Any proponents wish to address item E3? Any proponents? Any opponents wish to address item E3? Waive your time? Okay. Commissioner Overman, you recognize.
I still had a question regarding not so much parking, but if you've had any conversations with transportation or the Department of Transportation. There is a neighborhood across the street from this, and there are children at these facilities, correct? Practicing and whatever?
The facility that my client is operating will primarily be hours of operation after 5 p.m. until 11 p.m. at night. It's geared towards young adults.
Young adults? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, that will be driving there, I assume? No
Yes.
one walking, because there is an island on 301.
There's a median on 301. I don't know the exact distance, but I believe, I think I know where you're going with this. The closest crosswalk access over across 301 is probably about 1.5 miles to the south. But no, this is geared towards young adults, age range of like 25 to 35-year-olds. So this is not geared towards children.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was my concern.
Okay. Got a motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner Kemp to approve item E3. See no further discussion. Please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Mr. Moretta.
This brings us to E4, personal appearance 19-0800, modification to a plan development approved in 1984, located at 9556 East Fowler Avenue. Commissioners, this is a change to permit a different type of product. It's going from multifamily to townhome. It's also reducing those numbers from 232 units to 116. There's a proposal to revise the plan, to revise internal circulation, and also provide some level of connectivity to a parking lot that's being organized to function with AR property that is located to the southeast of the project. That AR project has a religious facility. The parking lot will work together and be essentially blended with the AR zoning that includes a religious facility, provide additional parking. The religious facility on the AR property is not part of this application. It contains all the required parking on it, but the events that they have are anticipated to generate more parking than what the code requires. So they're planning to blend that parking lot into the plan development. The plan development also has conditions requiring connectivity, so people that live in the development can also walk to this, and there's some level of connectivity between the parking lot and the AR facility. Staff is recommending approval of the conditions.
Good morning. Have you been sworn in?
Yes, I have been. Good morning. My name is Hush Govahi. I'm with Northside Engineering. We're located in Clearwater, 300 South Belcher Road. And I also have the representatives of the temple with me today. So if there are any questions that I cannot answer, I would ask them to maybe join us. Mr. Moretta described the project very eloquently. The latest modification to this site was done in 2006, and back then the developer was merely intending to build townhomes or multifamily basically. which was in the tune of 232 units. Our team since have purchased that property, and the intent, of course, is not to to develop a site for residential only. So because of that concept, we have cut the number of units on this site almost by 50%. So, we have designed a very nice project that this county can be, I think, proud of. We have a very nice entrance to the project off of Fowler. I think this project, if approved, will be enjoyed by, a lot of people. So if I can be assistance in answering any questions, I'll be glad to.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item E4, proponents? Any proponents wishing to address item E4? Any opponents wishing to address item E4? Any opponents? Waive your time, sir.
Thank
you. Okay. Motion by Commissioner Murman, second by Commissioner Kemp to approve item E4. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Mr. Moretta.
E5, personal appearance 19-0880. It's located on 13396 East US Highway 92. Commissioners, this is another minor modification to a plan development which was approved in 1990. This modification is to modify the location of the buildings and the parking layout. Staff is recommending approval with conditions.
Applicant here. Mr. Pressman, good morning. You've been sworn in.
Yes, I have. Todd Pressman, 200 2nd Avenue South, number 451 in St. Petersburg, Florida. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is a minor modification where it's just a movement of the footprint of the building. It also increases the setback, which is substantial, increases the distance to the adjoining residential. This is general RV. They made a wonderful investment in the county. Staff is approving it. There's been reductions in terms of impacts to residents, so we would ask your consideration and support. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item E5 as a proponent? Any proponents wishing to address item E5? Any opponents wishing to address item E5? Any opponents? Mr. Todd Pressman, you ready? Waive your rebuttal time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Murman, second by Commissioner White to approve item E5. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Mr. Beretta.
This brings us to E6, personal appearance 19-0396, located on the southeast corner of US Highway 301 and Sly Avenue. Commissioners, this is a minor modification to a plan development to add an additional access point onto Sly Avenue. The purpose of the access point is to facilitate and enhance movements for large truck traffic going to service the site. Staff is recommending approval with conditions.
Applicant here. Good morning, sir. You've been sworn in?
Yes, sir. David Smith, Stearns Weaver Miller, Director of Development and Zoning, on behalf of Racetrack Petroleum. As staff has indicated, this property was original PD, has a 400,000 square foot distribution facility. This is, Racetrack is purchasing the corner for a service station that also has diesel fuel for the service trucks. In order to separate passenger vehicle traffic from tractor trailer traffic, the access modifications are being requested. These are just for information purposes. Sly's an FDOT road, 301's an FDOT road. FDOT has reviewed, has no objections. Transportation staff has also reviewed and has no objections. We have racetrack representatives, the civil engineer and traffic engineer. If there are any questions, we can answer.
Okay. Thank you, sir. This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item E6 as a proponent? Any proponents addressing item E6? Any opponents wishing to address item E6? Any opponents? Waive your rebuttal time. Motion by Commissioner Overman, second by Commissioner Commissioner Murman to approve item E6. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Mr. Beretta.
Thank you, Commissioners. This brings us to item E8, personal appearance 19-0950. Commissioners, this takes us to 8418 Palm River Road. The applicant is proposing to modify the site plan through a minor modification process to eliminate a stormwater pond that was depicted on that plan on the westerly boundary of the site. The site will still comply with the stormwater requirements. It's just that stormwater pond that was depicted on the graphic is no longer needed. The adjacent zoning is M. Staff doesn't anticipate any compatibility issues. We are recommending approval with conditions.
Good morning again. David Wright with TSP Companies, P.O. Box 1016, Tampa, Florida. The request is to remove the stormwater management pond so that a service building can be built in its place. We're not seeking to increase the intensity or the FAR on the site, so we'll still be within the allowable FAR with the PD, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Okay. This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address item E8 as a proponent? Any proponents? Any opponents wishing to address item E8? Any opponents? Waive your rebuttal time. I do. Motion by Commissioner Merman, second by
I have
Commissioner.
a question.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You do.
I know we were on a roll there.
Commissioner Smith, do you recognize? I'm trying to get you out of here for lunch. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm always concerned if we're removing wetlands or stormwater storage areas in light of the flooding issues that we have everywhere. So why was this stormwater pond ever there? Was it required by the county in the first place, the one that is being removed? Yeah, just from staff.
Yeah, I believe that applicant can address more
Okay.
specifically, but a lot of times when these site plans are done, they're done in a non-engineered way, so the general layout of the site is put out, and that's going to control how the site will be laid out regardless of the engineering. Sometimes the engineering comes in and finds that the stormwater either can't work that way, or there's a better way or more efficient way to do it. And I think
And does, so when this came in, does our county stormwater management engineers look at this and confirm that we don't need that? Is that part of your staff approval?
Yeah, we would look at so when a project comes in, we look at it from two standpoints. One is, what does the stormwater need, and does the stormwater system as proposed meet our stormwater design requirements in terms of everything being there and the volume and thing. Then we look at the zoning conditions, and so that's what would get permitted unless a zoning condition would say it needs to be someplace else. So that is likely the case here, where we had either a zoning that says here's where your stormwater would go and it's not needed, or here's where stormwater doesn't go. I think it's the former. But we look at the need of the site and the zoning both, and if they conflict, then that's where the resolution needs to come in a case like this.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner, as an added measure, we also added a zoning condition. Condition number 9 states the surface water management system shall be designed in accordance with the regulations criteria contained in the Hillsborough County Stormwater Tech Manual.
Thank you.
So we believe that's the case. It would be the requirement anyway, but we added that as an extra layer of protection.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve item E8. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Who had the motion in the second?
Mr. Merman made the motion. Commissioner White, I believe, seconded.
Thank you.
All right. Motion carried 7-0.
Mr. Moretta.
Thank you, Commissioners. This brings us to E9, personal appearance 19-0962, located at 13408 Boyette Road in the South Shore area. The applicant's proposing a minor modification to a plan development originally approved in 1988. The site area of change contains 2 development options. One is for single family. The applicant is actually proposing to add the duplex option by modifying it. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. It has 2 development options, single family and duplex. The applicant is modifying the duplex lot size to go from 4,180 to 3,850 and the lot width from 38 to 35 feet, and removing 3 single-family lots from the zoning conditions. The applicant has also contacted us late yesterday to advise us they're going to be proposing a condition that will work along the eastern boundary, which is, as I understand it, unless I'm corrected with the revised condition, it's a 15-foot buffer area. The buffer area would be an inactive area that will be platted as such, because it won't be platted as part of the lot line, which means that the setback will, when added to the lot line, will provide a 15-foot buffer when the lot is platted with a 5-foot setback, the structures will effectively be 20 feet away for the primary structure. Staff is recommending approval with conditions.
Morning, Mr. Mabry. Have you been sworn in?
Good morning. No, I have not, actually. Thank you for saying that.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thanks. Good morning. Clayton Bricklemeyer Law Group. So this is a downzoning that I thought was going to be a nice ministerial matter, and it turns out that the neighbors to the east were under the impression that this was always going to be a treed conservation area. It is, in fact, has been approved. I know that this road configuration has been in place since 2004. It is more than half wetland. This request, as Joe said, is to slightly, it really accommodates the builder's pre-existing unit. And I haven't heard any opposition to the actual reduction from 38 to 35 feet. The issue is the folks to the east expected there to be trees. To try to be responsive to that, I got with staff, and what we came up with, and I spoke to a couple of the neighbors, and I told them what we could promise is that we would not have, from our property boundary, a structure would be no less than 20 feet from the eastern property boundary. That's achieved by, and Brian was nice enough to print these out for me this morning. I can hand these out. I'll hand these to the clerk. And I'll keep one so I can read it to you. It's a 15-foot buffer. Joe pretty much explains. A 15-foot buffer. The smallest yard is the side yard. So if the layout eventually ends up with a side yard up against that buffer, that's a 20-foot space between the property boundary and the building. I would submit to you there's also a rear yard to the east in every one of those duplexes. I would submit to you that we are building duplexes that look a whole lot like the folks to the east and are required by code to provide no buffer and no screen. You'll note there's additional language. I'll tell you, we have no tree survey. This is a zoning hearing, so we don't have a lot of the specifics, but what I tried to propose was within 10 feet of our boundary line to the west, that it remain virgin except for exotic species, to maintain any trees within that area. So I can guarantee them that the trees, the native trees in that 10 feet are gonna stay. We will do our best to preserve the rest, but we really don't know what's out there. That is a site planning exercise. So the substance of the application is, I think it's appropriate to shrink it 3 feet and remove 3 units from the overall density, and I'm available for questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, sir. This is a public hearing. Any proponents wishing to address item E9? Any proponents? Any opponents wishing to address item E9? Please come forward. All opponents, please come forward. You have 15 minutes between everyone. Has everyone been sworn in?
Yes.
Everyone?
Yes, sir.
All of you? Okay. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Scott Sheffield, address 13568 Circuit Crossing Drive, Lithia, Florida, 33547. I am one of the affected property owners. Additional affected property owners and my wife are behind me. Thank you in advance for listening to us. Our community is small, 78 unit maximum. Only 68 of those are currently occupied, and 4 of the other 10 are still under construction. The community is retired military, other retired, and elderly moving there thinking they were coming to a quiet neighborhood, which was going to be the last home for many of us. We're older. We are tucked in and nestled among the trees except for the Boyette Rd side, which is to the north of us and is about 250 yards from our boundary. We now find that we're about to have other homes sitting in our living rooms and kitchens. The following items will be addressed with Neal Properties, our builder, but we'd like to make you aware of them. To many of us along the tree line involved, and everybody here behind me is on that tree line. There are 7 villas, so 14 living units on the tree line out of the 78. When
We moved in, there was no PD ever mentioned by our builder, and there was no PD that we couldn't find one. Now, we understand, we found out yesterday that the original approval was 1988. There was a modification made in 2006. We understand that. Most of us were led to believe we were protected by a conservation area to our west. We were led to believe we would have the trees remaining in the backyard, and we paid lot premiums of an additional $10,000 for at least 5 of those 7 living units in order to live in a place where we had the trees behind us. So far, we've already had to deal with a large storage unit built at the front entrance of our gated complex. Every tree in the area was bulldozed. And that building, which is now 3 stories instead of the 2 that were discussed at the zoning meeting last year, is the first thing we see when we enter. In addition, that building was to have no outbuildings, and it now has 2. We are asking the Planning Commission at this point to grant us a continuance of the hearing, giving us time to get an attorney to discuss, review, and negotiate a further buffer, as we were only presented with the plot plan yesterday afternoon. That's the first time anybody ever saw the plot plan. And we thank Mr. Bricklemeyer for that. Sorry about that. We appreciate that, Mr. Bricklemeyer, and we understand that that's not your fault that it came in late. You're not being blamed. In addition, we have a signed petition from 65% of the residents. The rest are on vacation or live in other states part of the year and are not down here during the rather warm Florida summer. They go to New Jersey or New York. We also had vacations already planned. The elderly have many doctor's appointments. And we have people with work schedules. Not everybody retired. Some of us don't like to retire. The plans for the layouts were not, as I point out, were not handed over until yesterday. Franklin Homes is going to build no matter what. We understand that. But what we'd like to do is continue the negotiations for a bit and see if we can move that buffer back a bit. And if you look at if you have your plot plans, what we specifically propose at this point.
Do they have that? They don't. They don't have that.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Excuse me.
The concept shows, I can't even read that, it's too small. Can somebody give me a lot number? The last 2 buildings, which is lots 39, 41, and 2, be removed from the plan completely. That would afford us not a 20-foot buffer, it would give us about a 60-foot buffer, roughly. Density is not an issue. Mr. Bricklemeyer pointed out that they're reducing the density. That's not an issue with us. But we would point out that the entire Villa community that we've been able to contact does support the request for a continuance and further negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You have 9 minutes and 55
Yeah, I'd like
seconds.
to add something. He said density.
Come to the microphone, ma'am. Come to the mic.
Oh, I'm
Come
sorry.
to the mic.
what?
Come to the mic.
Okay. I'm the other
Please
half
state your-
of,
Please state your name.
oh, I am Jackie Sheffield, the other half of Scott. And he mentioned the density's not an issue, which is true, but it's the proximity. And I know you talked about giving us additional buffer, but some of the trees, it's very sparse behind some of us, which means if the tree line's going to be saved, that could be 1 tree. So I just wanted to add that also.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else is up opponent wishing to speak? Okay, thank you. Rebuttal, Mr. McMullen. You have 5 minutes.
Clayton Bricklemeyer again. This is an infill project, and as we know, infill projects have neighbors. I am very sympathetic to the fact that these neighbors feel surprised by this. The plot plan he's referring to, Mr. Sheffield's referring to, I shared with them one concept plan that we have, which I know not everyone will do. I was in trying my very best to work with folks. That's not necessarily the way it will look. It was a helpful in crafting the condition that we've proposed to try to deal with the issue. I would make one other point. I'm talking about the sparseness, the last thing that Ms. Sheffield mentioned. There are likely to be, again, we don't know, I don't have the tree survey. There is likely to be tree mitigation required. That mitigation can be along their line. We could actually improve the actual opacity over there, and it's likely that happens. There will probably be some room to the north on the way up to the wetlands as well, but we have to put those trees somewhere. I think that would be, considering in light of what's gone on, I think that would be a reasonable thing for us to undertake. Other than that, I mean, we are reducing the density, and we're trying to account for the neighbors' concerns. So I would ask for your approval. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner White, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, this is outside of the context of this land use meeting, but I would like you to take a message back to our consumer protection folks to take a look at the issue of, whether or not these folks were sold on the fact that the neighboring property is some sort of a conservation property and charged an extra premium for their lot. Because if that's occurred, that's obviously wrong, and I would want that investigated. Can I call Mr. Bricklemeyer back up to the podium? So does a tree survey exist at all, or there's just not a tree survey?
Not that I'm aware of, no, and
Okay.
it's pretty dense.
Okay. Mr. Gormley, is the issue with the buffer and specifically a mitigation plan, is that something we can address at the rezoning level?
The buffer certainly is, I think both of them are things that the board does have in their purview to address. We'll say that the way that this application is situated right now, it's currently approved for residential development adjacent to the existing residential development. So the understanding of the buyers notwithstanding, the current zoning doesn't have a buffer between those two residential pods. So we're talking about adding something that's not currently part of what we're regulating, and this issue came up, I believe, very recently. So that was something, as Mr. Moretta addressed, we came up with a condition in the short term. So we haven't really delved into that.
Right.
What exists out there today.
But at the rezoning level, we can add a pretty high level of specificity about a mitigation plan if the applicant agrees and the board wants to engage in that exercise.
It's certainly within the realm of what the board has discussed in terms of mitigation. I don't know how much information is available right now to get in the details of that conversation, but the nature and extent of buffering and what happens to that area when it gets developed is appropriate for board consideration.
I see nothing wrong with continued communication between the neighbors, Mr. Bricklemeyer, and staff. What's the next available meeting to have this continued to?
August 13th is our next board meeting. If it's the board's will, we could have discussions between now and then and come back with a bit more specific information on the buffer. But I'd defer to the applicant.
I was going to say, if it's okay, I don't think that you're going to, before we really get into site planning, before we have the zoning in place, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to produce anything that would particularly help you. I think we expect that the code is going to require us to mitigate under code provisions, right? I mean,
I'm talking more
there are
in
natural
terms-
resources provisions in the code that will require us to do some things. I tried to create this buffer zone that helps, and I think we would make efforts to do the mitigation that is required by the code to move stuff over. I don't think that there's anything really to be gained by continuing, and I'm pretty sure my client doesn't want to, but I mean, I defer to you. I just don't know that we're going to get any further than what's in front of you.
Yeah. Well, look, let me just say for the record that this is, of course, an opinion statement, okay, by Stacy White, but Clayton Bricklemeyer is not a bad actor, okay? You're always above board and want to do what's right and work with the neighbors. I do strongly feel, though, that some continued communication could be helpful here. So we're only talking about, gosh, just a few weeks at this point. So I am going to make a motion that we continue this to the August 13th meeting.
A motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Smith to continue this to August 13th meeting. Commissioner Smith, you recognize?
Thanks, and I appreciate this additional buffer. One thing I really like about it is that it's not platted as part of the individual lots, but it is a separate parcel owned and maintained by the homeowners association. So, because just like we were talking about this morning, a lot of times, especially if it's granted to each lot, then the homeowners see that as their own property, and they put up a shed, they put up a garage, they start building other structures, a swimming pool, whatever in there, and then it ceases to be that buffer if it's every little person. But if it's owned and maintained by the homeowners association, even so, there's not going to be any signs there saying, don't put a shed up here or temporary or permanent structure. What recourse would the neighbors have if they start seeing people? Is that a code enforcement issue at that point?
It would either be a code enforcement issue of one sort or another, whether it's natural resources, if it's vegetation, tree removal, or other encroachments into the buffer. It would be an enforcement issue at that point, yes.
And I agree with Commissioner White that I understand what Mr. Bricklemeyer is saying, that we've already gone pretty far with this, given what your entitlements already are. And it's not a bad request, but I think a conversation with the neighborhood couldn't hurt to just make everyone start off on the right foot of being good neighbors. So that's why I'm seconding this. Thank you.
Commissioner Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, I'd just like to agree with the comments that have been made earlier. I appreciate, Mr. Bricklemeyer, that you have worked with the neighbors and the position that you're in. That was not of your making, but sounds like a misrepresentation on the part of the home builder for the development that these homeowners are in. So I also, not that, I just, in all opportunity to maybe do whatever could be done, and appreciate that has already been started by you. And to Commissioner Smith's points, thank you for pointing that out. I'd never really thought about the difference between the homeowners owning the property and the individual platting. That's a really good point. So I'll just, I would agree with continuance and again, recognize your cooperation and the fact that it's clear that it wasn't of your making.
Okay. We have a motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Smith to continue to August the 14th, is it?
August 13th.
13th? August the what?
That's it.
August the 13th.
At 9 a.m.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Mr. Moretta.
Thank you, Commissioners. This brings us to item G1 on the regular agenda. This is a rezoning for a standard district from ASC 1 to RSC 6 with a restriction. Commissioners, this case was opened and closed and then continued at the last board meeting. This involves a 0.94 acre parcel in the Brandon area at 1001 Hummingbird Lane. If you recall, that most of the discussion revolved around septic tank requirements, which require a half-acre lot minimum. The applicant at the time was proposing to get 3 lots through a restriction they were posing on themselves to get 3 lots out of the .94 parent tract. It also involved the Garden Estates area of the Brandon plan that suggests the half-acre minimum lot size should be implemented. In our discussions, when the board continued this back to have further dialogue with the applicant. What resulted from that dialogue is that the applicants proposed to eliminate the 3rd lot request and is proposing a condition to achieve 2 lots. One of the lots will achieve a half-acre lot, while the second lot will achieve a .44 acre lot size. If the board moves to approve this, then the applicant would have to follow that up with a variance action to permit the less than half-acre lot on septic. But that's the issue as it's been reconfigured before the board today.
Have a motion to open for oral argument. Motion by Commissioner Berman, second by Commissioner White. Open for oral argument. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
I guess I should have read that. Commissioners, the proposed restriction has also been, I apologize, the proposed restriction.
Hold up.
Motion carried 7-0.
Now, Mr. Moreno.
The proposed condition has been handed out by Brian Grady. This is what the applicants proposed regarding the 2 lots subdivision, one having a minimum half-acre and the other having a .44 acre. So just for clarification, as the applicant talks to this, the condition is in front of you now.
Did you want to speak now? Good morning, sir. Have you been sworn in?
Good morning. I'm Charles Sochi, representing...
Excuse me, before we get started, Ms. Lugman, since this was continued from last meeting, we have one other person that's listed as a party of record as an opponent. Does that person have the opportunity to speak also?
She has already had the opportunity to speak. If the board desires to hear from her, you certainly may. I believe she is here in the audience.
All right, applicant, you have 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just here in case you had any other questions. He summarized everything. What was your name again, sir? My name is Charles Sochi. I'm representing this rezoning. Everything's cut and dry now. Last time I was here, the commissioners asked me to more closely follow the Garden Estates plan. I consulted with the Planning Commission, who confirmed that, yes, they're looking for 0.5 acre lots, even though it is urban service area overlap. County water is available. I'll be using that. And I've spoken to the health department, who seems to have no problem issuing a septic permit based on the fact that sewer availability is not there. Other than that, I mean, I'm 0.44 acres for the second lot. This mimics other rezonings that are currently taking place with no objections in the area. So.
Okay. At this point, I guess we need to hear from the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Melissa Leinhard, Planning Commission. I did give testimony regarding this rezoning application at the last public hearing. I'm sorry, at the last hearing. But what I wanted to put on the record, that while the record's been established as part of the zoning hearing master meeting, and the Planning Commission is not able to change our consistency finding up here on the dais, limiting the applicant to 2 lots would move closer to meeting the intent of the Brandon Garden Estates District in the community plan, and the Planning Commission does offer no objection to this request.
Okay.
Thank you.
Zoning Hearing Master.
Yes, Commissioners, I summarized the zoning hearing master's recommendation at the last meeting, but I'll just recap by stating that, as you heard, the applicant's intent now is to subdivide the property into 2 lots. There would still be a variance required as stated by Development Services, but you have heard the Planning Commission's kind of revision to its statement from the prior meeting. The zoning hearing master did not hear this application again. It was continued directly back to the board. So the recommendation of denial of the requested rezoning did not change from the May 13th zoning hearing master meeting. Believe staff may have some additional comments.
Commissioner, from a staff perspective, we believe that this change brings it a lot closer to to actual compliance with the code, but for the .06 acre difference in the second lot, it does bring the number of lots on septic tanks to be consistent with the code, and again, very close in the lot size. So even though we're listed as denial here, that was the original application. We do think this has gone a long way to addressing the concerns that we originally had with the project.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner White, you recognize.
Thank you. This unfortunate individual is 0.06 acres shy of having an acre and being able to just divide this into the two half-acre lots and calling it a day. I had to miss the last land use meeting, but I've been thoroughly brought up to speed by staff on the issues here. I think 0.44 acres is close enough to a half acre to meet the intent of the Garden Estates portion of the Brandon Community Plan. So with that being said, I'm going to move approval of the item.
Have a motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Merman. Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Oben, you recognize.
I'm not in opposition of the amount of space, and I appreciate giving up the other lot in order to make this happen. My bigger question has to do with the fact that we're continuing to approve properties and development in an area where wastewater service is apparently available, and we're approving it for septic. Is that correct?
The issue there is we have a force main line. It's adjacent to this lot, but it's not that's a line that needs a pressurized connection to it. So this area is within the urban service area. It is, again, by the comp plan, community plan, identified for some larger lot than would typically be in the urban service area. It does have entitlements today. It does have the ability to develop under the current regulations if the cost to bring wastewater to the site is not feasible for the size of the project. And that's the case with Mr. Soshi's lot. To hook up to the pressurized line would be a high expense improvement that, when borne by a lot of lots, can be spread out, that cost. In the case of a 1 or 2 lot split, it's really not cost feasible to make that type of connection.
So we just kick that can down the road when we do need to have wastewater service to all of the areas and get rid of septic tanks?
And that's the reason that we limit the amount of development that can occur on septic tanks in the urban service area. So we don't want to render property basically undevelopable through our regulations. So we allow some level of development on septic tank, but we do it at a level that we think isn't going to establish a long-term pattern. So you couldn't cut a subdivision in the urban service area and have a bunch of lots on septic tank, but you take that lot and split it into 2. So that's what we've done to kind of balance that immediate development versus ultimately how we want to see the area develop.
I understand. I'm just still objecting to the fact that we're continuing to approve septic tanks programs, because obviously we have kicked it down the road. So, thank you.
Mr. Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you, Commissioner Overman, for your comments. And I think this is something for a longer discussion, but just quickly, one thing I'd like to understand. So the regular forced main, I mean, are we talking about the person hooking up to it and the cost from the main to them? Or are we saying that they have to pay for the larger, main that reaches to them?
In this case, it is the connection from the lots to that main that exists, but the connection, since the main is pressurized, there needs to be a pressurization of the material going into that line, and it's the construction of that pump or lift station to take the effluent, pressurize it so that it can go into that pressurized line. That's the expense item there. In this particular one, sometimes it would be extension of lines as well, but in this case, it is the connection to that line.
I think at some point we should and need to have a more thorough discussion of this. I appreciate you raising that concern.
A motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Merman to approve item G1. See no further discussion. Please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you.
Mr. Moretta.
Thank you, Commissioners. This brings us to item G2 on the agenda. This is a proposed rezoning for a standard district. The proposal is going from RSC6 with a mobile home overlay and general commercial. The rezoning proposes to zone the entire site general commercial with a restriction. The restriction will prohibit convenience stores, restaurants with drive-thrus, automatic car washes, and freestanding taverns, bars, lounges, nightclubs, and dance halls. Commissioners, this is located on the west side of U.S. Highway 41, specifically at 10815 U.S. Highway 41, and it's also located just abutting Shirley Avenue on the north side. When staff evaluated this request, Commissioners, our concern was essentially with the extension of the commercial on the back side of the existing commercial area and how that orientation will relate to what's across the street, which is also zoned RSC6 mobile home. Currently, the site has sufficient vegetation, and the site will be, operating as part of the general commercial that will operate on US 41, which is already established there. But there's nothing in the proposal that addresses the orientation of that site to Shirley Avenue. However, as I understand it, the applicant, in dialogue earlier this morning, has proposed additional restrictions that will deal with that orientation matter along Shirley Avenue. And I believe Brian Grady has been working with the applicant, who will offer up the additional restrictions that will work in tandem with the restrictions on the use itself.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brian Grady, Hillsborough County Development Services. The additional restriction will read as follows. Access to the site in folio 51016 shall be limited to a single access point on Shirley Lane as currently generally located on Shirley Lane, subject to compliance with Hillsborough County access management regulations. Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Have a motion to open for oral argument. Motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner Hagan to open for oral argument. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Excuse me.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Have you been
Steve
sworn in?
Allison, representing petitioner.
Have you been sworn in?
I have. First, in regards to the proposed new condition, we do support that. In fact, at the zoning hearing master, we had submitted a preliminary site plan into the master file, which indicated that very access point. So I had assumed it was already part of reality. No objection to adding that as a further restriction. Obviously, I'm here to enthusiastically support the findings of the zoning hearing master. He found this request in conformance with the requirements of the LDC and established principles of zoning law. I can give you the 5 or 2 minute presentation. The 5 minute would include some history as to why we got where we did. If you would like to hear that, I'm happy to do so. I'll take that as a yes. For the record, once again, Steve Allison. Both staffs, as you know, objected to the request. Planning Commission staff, I believe this is the subject page of the future land use element map. When you look at it and you see this, the red area is OC 20, the yellow area is RSC 6. So I think they looked at it and said that might be an intrusion into a residential area. And if this was the only thing you looked at, that would be a valid perspective. The reality is a little bit different. And I commissioned a very high-tech map to be produced to show what the actual situation is in terms of zoning and uses along this corridor. It was assumed that this would be a line of demarcation between commercial and residential. In fact, we have on the west a PD approved for CI uses. We're requesting CG. CI is the more intensive. This is a PD that is also approved for CI uses. This is our parcel. To the south, there's another CG parcel and another CG parcel. So in reality, in this immediate area, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks. 3 of them already contain CI uses and zoning. So this is hardly an intrusion given that established development pattern. County staff, I think, had more particular concern with the relationship of the property to 2 residential properties to the south. Let me say further that all of this property in this area, which I've marked RSC 6, also has an RSB overlay. That's residential show business district, which is not an exclusive residential district. It allows open storage for select items. And open storage otherwise requires CI zoning. So this is not a pristine or pure single-family situation. However, the properties immediately south, which staff did have concerns about, those do not have the RSB overlay. Sometimes well, first of all, my client enjoys a very solid reputation in this area. He's invested in and very much interested, cares about the future of his community, and is known for maintaining his properties in an impeccable fashion. We have oftentimes the best indicator of compatibility is the actual opinion of the neighborhood itself. We have 50 petitions submitted in support of this application. At the zoning hearing master hearing, we had several dozen people show up in support. This map, every X indicates people in the immediate area who have signed petitions in support, and that includes each one of the residential properties contiguous to our site. This neighborhood wants this because they see what my client does when he develops property. And at this, I indicated there was a big group at the zoning hearing master meeting. Obviously, in the workday, not as many folks can show up, but there are some here in attendance. I'd like to ask them to stand at this time. So we think this zoning is fully appropriate for the site, compatible with the neighborhood, and we respectfully request your approval.
Thank you, sir. We have no other parties of record to speak on this issue, so we'll move now into the Planning Commission staff.
Thank you, Melissa Leinhardt, Planning Commission staff. The subject property is located within the residential 6 and the office commercial 20 future land use categories. The property is located in the urban service area and is also located within the limits of the Gibsonton Community Plan and the South Shore Area-Wide Systems Plan. The requested rezoning of the entire parcel to commercial general would extend into an established residential area along Shirley Avenue, which is a local street. While CG uses are allowed to be considered in the residential 6 future land use category, all non-residential uses are subject to commercial locational criteria as outlined in policy 22.1 of the future land use element of the comprehensive plan. The applicant has submitted a waiver to locational criteria for staff to review. The waiver is not supported at this time based upon compatibility concerns with the adjacent residential development directly to the west, north, and south of the subject property. The intent of the residential 6 future land use category is to designate areas that are suitable for low-density residential development with suburban-scaled neighborhood commercial, office, and mixed-use projects, and again, that's subject to commercial locational criteria as outlined. The request to rezone the entire 1.76 acre parcel would not be consistent with the residential 6 future land use category, as the requested waiver is not compatible with the existing surrounding residential land uses. In addition, as outlined in policy 22.8 of the future land use element, the applicant nor staff has identified any unique circumstances or specific findings that would justify a recommendation of approval for the waiver. Allowing CG uses on the residential 6 portion of the property would intrude into the established residential area. This would be inconsistent with several comprehensive plan compatibility and neighborhood protection policies, such as Objective 16, Policy 16.1, 16.2, and 16.3. In addition, the existing CG zoning aligns with the office commercial future land use category. This is a well-established line between commercial and residential uses north and south along this roadway. Based upon these facts, staff does not find this request compatible with residential development along Shirley Avenue. The request is also not consistent with the Gibsonton Community Plan, which emphasizes appropriately scaled commercial development along Gibsonton Drive and US Highway 41. The residential 6 portion of the site is not located along Highway 41 and is located interior to an existing residential neighborhood. And based upon those considerations, Planning Commission staff finds the proposed plan development inconsistent with the future of Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan for unincorporated Hillsborough County.
Zoning hearing master.
The zoning hearing master considered the applicant's rezoning request to a restricted commercial general zoning district for a parcel at the northwest corner of US Highway 41 and Shirley Avenue in the Gibsonton area. The zoning hearing master noted that the subject parcel is 1.76 acres overall, currently fronting US 41 with CG zoning, but containing 0.88 acres, presently zoned RSC 6 mobile home on its western roughly 1/2. As you heard from the Planning Commission is not supporting the request, and accordingly, Development Services is not supporting the request either. The basis for that is that the RSC 6 mobile home portion of the property does not qualify for commercial uses based on the future land use elements commercial locational criteria. However, the applicant has requested a waiver of the commercial locational criteria that the Board of County Commissioners may grant. The Planning Commission has not supported the waiver based on compatibility concerns with residential uses west of US 41. The zoning hearing master examined the zoning districts in the area and found that multiple districts permitting mostly commercial intensive CI uses, more intensive than the requested CG district, as well as commercial general CG, extend westerly of 41. Some or substantially westerly of the OC 20 future land use, intruding into the residential 6 plan category. The zoning hearing master also considered the overwhelming support of the neighborhood, many of whom testified at the zoning hearing master hearing. The zoning hearing master also noted that the neighborhood lies within the coastal high hazard area of the coastal planning area, and the county has given priority in these areas to uses that have lesser impact on evacuation routes and hurricane shelter spaces. The zoning hearing master noted that the applicant has offered restrictions from the more intensive commercial general zoning uses in consideration of the zoning hearing master's analysis. The waiver of the commercial locational criteria for the RSC 6 mobile home portion of the subject site was found to be appropriate by the zoning hearing master, and the zoning hearing master recommended approval of the request to commercial general restricted zoning.
Moving to board discussion, Commissioner Merman, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I am going to move approval of this item. Whenever something comes up about Gibsonton, you all know I'm going to be 100% behind this community. They are a forgotten part of Hillsborough County. That is why when we've been discussing transportation and corridors, I said I want to look at from the Alafai River all the way down through Ruskin. I mean, Gibsonton is a huge opportunity for redevelopment. So that aside, and I understand the Planning Commission, but what they're trying to do here is they're trying to approve or apply rules and standards from normal communities into Gibsonton. And honestly, because I did the community plan with this community back in I think it was 1998 and 2000. But Gibsonton is a very diverse community. It has a lot of extreme different characteristics to it because of the show business environment. And if you travel down Shirley, if you travel down any of these small streets, you'll see the character of Gibsonton. It is folks living there, employed probably by Bobby Ramey and his business, because I know they depend on his business for jobs. And that what he is asking to do, not being opposed by the residents, should be a major consideration here. I really feel strongly about this area, his business, and what we're trying to do. They are still not on sewer, and that I'm going to push it until I can't push anymore, because if they're going to redevelop, if we're going to start applying normal standards and practices to this area, then we have to treat them like a community that has county sewer, all those great things that we give other communities. This is not intruding into the residential. It may appear that if you just look at a map. These people are not, the people and citizens of Gibsonton are not objecting to this. And I think if they were objecting, if they thought it was intruding, all these people would be here in force against it. But no, they're supporting. And I think the consistency and compatibility arguments are not founded here. It's a great community. There's so much history here with the carnival workers, and I just love the community. And in fact, I should have worn my hat. I have a hat in the office that says "Make Gibtown Great Again," and it is something. But we've got to start looking at it. And I know I have talked to Melissa Zornita about reviewing their community plan to make sure that we are updating it and moving this community forward like it deserves to be moved forward. So I ask that you all please support this. It's not It's not a crazy request by any sense of the word that he's asking for. So thank you.
Commissioner Smith, you recognize.
Thank you. And I have a very soft spot in my heart for Gibsonton also. One of my dearest childhood friends traveled with the carnival and was very involved with the Showman's Club and the community there. You know, that RSB overlay that Mr. Allison referred to, that's a very well thought out overlay to allow the residential as well as the carnival, the storage of the carnival equipment and trucks. It's a very colorful area with a lot of personality. And when we do get around to reviewing that community plan, and I stopped in on some of those community plan meetings, I think we really need to do what Commissioner White talks about all the time, and that is placemaking, and make sure that that charm stays while we redevelop. And certainly, I'm with you on the septic upgrades every time. I understand the issues of encroachment of commercial into a residential neighborhood, and I appreciate our planners working on those issues. But I think I agree with Commissioner Merman that we have to then weigh the details. And I especially appreciate Mr. Allison's efforts in working with the neighborhood. I did watch this zoning hearing on television, and I saw the neighbors come one by one and speak to their support of this in detail, and their support of the applicant, and their sense that this would be an improvement to the neighborhood. And I'm just very impressed that you worked with the neighborhood and worked and showed us all that support of that. But I'm always mindful that a zoning is forever, even if the ownership changes. And so we have to be very careful that we are approving something that will work even when this great applicant and owner sells it to the next people in the future, and they just inherit the zoning. So that's why it was very important to me to see that condition that you brought forward today, having the nailing down the issue of how you address the issue of the ingress and
the access, yes.
Access on the part that does intrude into the residential area. And we did not get that passed out to us. And you mentioned, Mr. Allison, a site plan that showed that, but when I looked through the case file, the only site plan I see kind of shows a possibility of that. So,
yes, Commissioner.
Yes, please.
The site plan I believe Mr. Allison is referring to is a site development plan, would be a post-zoning plan. This is a standard zoning district, so there is no site plan control on it. However, as you referenced, the applicant has agreed to a restriction on the access to the site, limiting one access point to the site to Shirley Lane, which is the street to the south, and generally the existing location is shown as it exists today. And so that would then control how access would work for that site. That will be a zoning condition that will travel with it. It was something that we discussed today with the applicant, so we didn't have an opportunity to write it up. So Mr. Grady read into the record does effectuate that and limits that access point to the one existing now, and it gives certainty as that site develops in the future, how the traffic access dynamics will work for the site.
And so that access would have to be on the part that is closest to Highway 41, not the back end part?
Correct. It's currently on the front side, the side
Right.
that's zoned CG. Maybe slight adjustments to that to meet access management, but it'll be generally in that location, which puts it on the front end in the piece that is in the higher comp plan category.
Right. So, it is complicated when you have something that doesn't seem to fit in with the plan, but I think the applicant and Mr. Allison and the neighbors have have really made an effort to allay those concerns, so I'll be supporting it.
Commissioner Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Gibbtown has a lot of fans here today. I had been an aide to Kathy Castor in the past, and so am also familiar with the community. I was very impressed by the map that had X's all around the project, and by your attendance and your care for this. And this is, even though it's not redoing the community plan, this is, in essence, kind of a community waiver of the community plan, I feel. And with your support, telling us that, this is the essence of what happens with community plans. I also, I think more and more we've been looking at kind of some more flexibility in terms of how we build communities, and not just with single-family residential, but a kind of zone where there's more opportunity for what we term mixed use. And perhaps this is, I'm not sure what the plan is here, but it's very much appreciated, the community support. I will also go on record that back in 2004, 2005, 2006, we realized that in our office, we were approached both by Ruskin and Gibsonton about the lack of the sewer and water access there, and I think I think there's a great future for Gibsonton, and that's part of what I think when commissioners are here saying don't build outside the urban service line, we're saying that places like that need to be places that we're investing in and building and making better infrastructure for, so that it can bring about the kind of promise and investment that you all obviously are supporting and want to see happen. So I'll also be joining with this vote, and I look forward to seeing that, and I look forward also to, I hope, seeing ferry service down in that area, so that that would even be something else.
Commissioner Overman, you recognize.
I do appreciate how difficult it is when we have areas that are transitioning from commercial and major corridors to residential, and having residential and commercial next to each other oftentimes is a little challenging. Ultimately, it appears, correct me if I'm wrong, I know it doesn't require this, but it does appear as though this would be like a storage unit kind of facility that would not have your typical commercial intensive type of noise associated with it, or something like that that would be less attractive. Is that what we're looking at?
Well, Commissioners, what the board has before it is a request for commercial zoning that has a range of uses that could be included. There are some specific uses that are excluded.
Right.
But there's a range of uses that could potentially be put on the site beyond what's there today, which I think is a facilitator of a contractor's office without open storage on the site currently. But that the site is not limited to that development proposal. That's where what we do have certainty on is the range of uses and, if approved, the access to the site, however it redevelops.
Well, I appreciate the restrictions. Yeah. Those I do appreciate. I'm sure the community does as well. But having the opportunity for, some general commercial is attractive. I do think it will be ultimately important to make sure that the two homes that are south on Shirley Lane, as the project developed, have some special consideration. I see there are lots of signatures there, and it appears a lot of them are on Shirley. But I do like the idea of having community stakeholder really work hard to improve an area and appreciate the effort that's being made here. Again, it's always difficult when you're getting commercial close to residential and that one going a little further, but it is a single lot, where the zoning changes in the middle of it. And so making some considerations, I think, is a valid exercise. So thank you.
Okay. I've been going out to Gibsonton since the 1950s, and one goes, really? I remember when Mosaic was U.S. phosphate, and nothing grew around that phosphate plant. That was before OSHA had any regulations. Trees would not even grow around there. It was bad. And I went out there a lot because my dad worked at U.S. Phosphate for 44 years, going in and out of that place. And I was out there recently with Commissioner Merman. We did a hurricane seminar out there, and I was really, really surprised, not surprised, but the way things are going out there. I understand the Planning Commission's dilemma there, but again, some of these community plans need to be revisited. We need to look at those again. And having worked in an area of this county where we have to have upgrades in our infrastructure, Commissioner Merman, I know you're pushing for that, and we've got a little while before we leave. Maybe we can work and try to get things done out there. So, Mr. Allison, I think you'll have the votes to get this done. Okay? So, we have a motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner White. See no further discussion. Please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Mr. Beretta.
Commissioners, this brings us to the final item of the G category. This is G3, rezoning to plan development 19-0426. Current zoning on the site is RSC 6, which permits residential development on 7,000 square foot lot minimums. The site is located at 1514 Haven Bend in the greater Carrollwood Northdale plan area. Commissioners, the request before you is a plan development to permit a community residential home with a maximum of 8 placed persons. Just to provide you context of our evaluation, when it comes to community residential home, they're divided into types, and they go up from A to D as they progress in the number of placed beds or intensity. In the situation, if you have a type A, which is the least intensive type, it allows a maximum of 6 placed beds. That's not what's before you, but just to provide some context, in the situation where 6 placed beds are concerned, the state preempts the locals from essentially regulating that land use as a community residential home, and it requires that we treat it as a single-family home, and that's if it meets a separation requirement of 500 feet from other similar homes. In this case, the applicant's proposing to go above that. They're proposing to go into the 8-place residence, which would be a type B community residential home. By operation of the Land Development Code, the Land Development Code would require for 8-place persons, there is no preemption from the state. We would evaluate that for compatibility. And what our code guides us to is that for 8-place beds, that site should be separated from residential zoning by 500 feet. In this case, the property is situated in the middle of a residential zoning. In fact, it's situated in the middle of a residential developed area. And because of that, staff felt we could not support it. We are recommending denial, and oral argument has been filed.
Have a motion to open for oral argument.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Overman to open for oral argument. See no further discussion. Please record your vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Yes, sir. Are you the applicant?
Yes.
Okay. Have you been sworn in?
Yeah. No, I didn't. I just got here. I'm sorry.
Pardon?
I just got here.
Okay, needs to be sworn in.
Can you raise your right hand for me? All right. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right.
Just state your name, sir.
My name is Roniel Spiegel. I'm the applicant. I'm the owner of the property. Like he was mentioning, we're trying to increase the number of beds from 6 to 8. Right now, we're going through the process of opening a Type A community residential home, which has got the final from Fire Marshal a couple of days ago. We're going to go through the final building inspection. I think it's tomorrow or today. So basically, what we do is like we have residents that need help, assistance throughout the day. This is mainly for elderly people. They might need help with the medication, going to the bathroom, or cooking their food and serving the food and helping with anything they need. we were trying to increase the number of beds because of the transfer from these patients. Sometimes they need like more specific care. So when you have only 6 beds and you have, let's say, four residents and you have 2 transferring now, the business can be hurt. And you have employees, you have all the costs of the mortgage on the property, all the costs and utilities and everything that you have to pay for. So right now we're not gonna do any modification on the property. It's gonna remain the same. It's gonna look the same as it is right now. The only request is very simple. It's just to increase the number of beds. And anything we will have to do in regards to fire sprinklers or compliance with anything that we have to do is gonna be with the licensed contractor through the legal process. And I don't believe that this is gonna affect the community at all, because what's better than having, let's say you have a loved one that needs this type of care, and you have a facility in the middle of the neighborhood where you can stop by anytime during the day, even weekends. It's very close to you. So right now I'm opening this with my brother. He's operating one. It's been in business for a little bit over 4 years. All the residents are very happy. Their relatives are really happy about the service we offer, and basically that's what my request is. I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, if you have
We
any
have
questions.
no party of record, so we're going to move now to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Melissa Leinhardt, Planning Commission staff. The subject property is located in the residential 4 future land use category. It is in the urban service area, and it is also within the limits of the Greater Carrollwood-Northdale Community Plan. The proposed plan development is consistent and it is allowable use within the residential 4 future land use category. The applicant is requesting approval of an 8-bed type B community residential home. Community residential homes are considered residential support uses and are allowable in most plan categories subject to compatibility. Community residential homes, schools, adult daycare facilities, and nursing homes are all considered residential support uses. These types of uses are allowed within residential neighborhoods in order to directly serve the population. In fact, residential support uses are an allowable land use in any of the residential, commercial, and industrial future land use categories. The proposed special use is comparable to the surrounding development pattern, as the proposed use will remain in the current building, which is a residential home, and will continue to complement the character of the area consistent with future land use policy 16.3. The requested approval is at the maximum number of beds that could be considered for the site and is therefore consistent with policy 20.6 of the future land use element. With 0.4 acres, the subject property could be considered for up to 8 beds per the conversion rate in the land development code. The request is also consistent with the Carrollwood-Northdale Community Plan, as the community plan supports residential support uses that help establish a sustainable community. And based upon those considerations, Planning Commission staff finds the proposed plan development consistent with the Future of Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan for unincorporated Hillsborough County.
Okay, thank you very much. Zoning Hearing Master.
The zoning hearing master considered the applicant's request for a plan development zoning district to allow for a type B community residential home with a maximum of 8 place residents. Section 6.11.28A of the Land Development Code provides that community residential homes housing 6 or fewer residents shall be deemed a single-family unit and non-commercial residential use for the purposes of the Land Development Code. Accordingly, a type A community residential home is deemed to be a single-family unit and a non-commercial residential use, which is also a reflection of state law where Florida statutes at section 419.001 subsection 2 provides similar language to the Land Development Code. However, Land Development Code section 6.11.28A provides that no community residential home type B or C shall be located within a radius of 1,200 feet of another existing type B or C community residential home in a multifamily zone, nor within a radius of 500 feet of an area of non-agricultural residential single-family zoning. The zoning hearing master noted that the applicant has requested a waiver of this requirement as the subject property lies within a residential single-family zoning district, and therefore there is 0 setback from single-family zoning. The zoning hearing master stated that the applicant's justification for a waiver request to the Land Development Code distance separation does not indicate that the public purpose of the specified separation distance is satisfied to an equivalent or greater degree. Accordingly, the zoning hearing master found that the waiver is not appropriate. The subject request for a type B community residential home within the RSC 6 zoning district would not result in development that is compatible with the neighborhood. The zoning hearing master therefore recommended denial of the request.
Board discussion. Commissioner Hagan, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Board members, not only is this application in my district, but it's also in my neighborhood. It's a unique and intriguing property on a corner lot, but the bottom line is that it's right in the middle of a neighborhood surrounded by homes on all sides. No one signed up for oral argument, but if you look in the backup, there was significant opposition at the ZHM, including a petition with 54 signatures in opposition. The staff report says that it shifts the use from being a community residential home that is considered a single-family home to a multi-family institutional use. The property is surrounded by RSC zone property on all sides. An introduction of a multi-family institutional use within the residential subdivision would not be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. It's not supported by staff or in the ZHM's recommended denial, and I do feel for the applicant, but we must preserve the character of the neighborhood, so I'm going to move denial.
Second.
It's a motion by Commissioner Hagan, second by Commissioner Smith for denial. Commissioner Overman, you recognize.
You know, it's interesting when we have projects that come into a community, it does look as though the Plan B does have zoning of possibility of going to as many as 14 residents, but the applicant has actually restricted it at 8, if I'm reading this correctly, which seems appropriate. The other issue is that while it is in the residential neighborhood, it is on a corner lot, and three, for all practical purposes, you know, 2.5 of the property are actually bordered by streets rather than a home. It does, you know, there is one on 2 sides. It is affected by a home, but it's the smallest sides of the property are actually facing other residential properties, whereas a majority of the actual property is buffered by a road or a street within the community. If you're going to have this kind of property within a neighborhood, within a residential area, this would appear to be the most appropriate. Additionally, if you live on that corner, it's cornered or bordered by basically two roads, the noise road for that particular property would not be as attractive as it would be where you have homes all lined up next to each other. I would support this move. I know it does seem a little challenging because it is in a neighborhood, and I did see that there was some opposition. But if this property has not been a problem in the past, adding 2 additional residents or for services or room for 2 additional persons, it sounds like is what they're applying for, does not seem onerous, and I would support the motion to approve the application.
We have a motion on the floor now to deny.
No, to deny, I know.
There's a motion to deny. Let me ask Commissioner Hagan a question. You say this is in your neighborhood. Did the applicant meet with the citizens out there to try to work anything out as you know of?
I'm unaware of that.
Applicant?
Yes. I organized a neighborhood meeting. It took place at a library it's on Barrows Avenue. It was on Saturday, I think in March. Neighbors came. They raised their concern. We talked to them. There were some disagreements. So some people had questions. Some people had concern. But we tried to explain what we're trying to do and what we're gonna do. Because their idea is that we're gonna have a lot of traffic or a lot of I don't know. For some reason, they're gonna be like coming a lot of people driving there, coming, dropping off, picking up people. And I was trying to explain that this type of facility only have some of the people that live there don't drive, so mainly they remain there most of the time. The only time they leave the property is when their families come and pick them up on Saturday or Sunday, or maybe during the week. There was also a piece of information that I forgot to mention, and it's a little bit about the history of this property. When I was looking to purchase a property for this matter, this property, the first owner of the property passes away in 2013. After that, the property goes on a trust. It was vacant for several years. So we thought that it would be a good idea to purchase this, remodel the property, and at the end it's going to bring value to the community because it's not going to be vacant and nobody's taking care of that property. And besides that, I did try to answer the question, I'm sorry. I did try to work out things with the neighbors by organizing the meeting, and I think I provided the documentation during the zoning master hearing. Thank you.
Development Services, why did you deny? Why were you not supporting it? Can you tell us that again?
The locational criteria in the Land Development Code for Type B requires a 500-foot separation from residential zoning. And that's primarily, the orientation of this is it's located within a residential area itself. So we felt that it was not consistent with where the code was guiding location of these types of facilities.
Under the Land Development Code, this type of use is classified as something other than a single-family residential use. That's where the separation comes in. It does require a little bit different design. Buffering and screening would need to be provided for these type of facilities. And I believe this request includes a waiver of portion of that buffer area. But essentially, these, once they cross 6 residents, it's a different type of facility from the code treatment of them. And so that we see them as differing from other residential support uses that could be existing within neighborhoods. In fact, the code guides this to be treated differently, and that was the basis for our objection.
Commissioner Smith, you recognize.
Thank you. I do want to clarify one point. This is not just going from like adding 2 beds to a facility that is there already. It's not in operation as a 6-bed facility now. Then they're adding 2 beds, right?
That's correct. They have the ability to operate as a Type A with 6 residents or fewer. My understanding is they have not commenced operation. I think that was discussed at the hearing, so this is prospective.
Right. So that's to your point that it's sounds like a little jump, but it's actually a big change to the neighborhood from what is there and what they would expect from the zoning. And as far as the traffic, the residents themselves may not be driving, but they would have visits by doctors, visits by pharmacy deliveries. There was some compelling testimony from people at the zoning hearing in the neighborhood who have experience with nursing homes and the kinds of traffic that one could expect there. And it's more than you might think off the top of your head at first. So that's why. And I just see this as a big change for the neighborhood, and I'm glad to have Commissioner Hagan's testimony from the neighborhood itself to guide us on this. So that's why I'll be supporting the denial.
Commissioner Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the clarification there. Because I just want to say, Commissioner Overman, I think that was a really valiant and good effort of really to clarify. I mean, if it was just between, adding 2 more residents to an existing home, because of the need and everything, I would have I thought it was pretty compelling. But knowing that there isn't any residents there at this time, that's, I think, a different story.
Mr. Hagan, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I do not disagree with many of Commissioner Overman's remarks. As I said initially, it's a unique and intriguing property because of the way the roads come through it. But as Commissioner Smith said, it is a single-family home, and we shouldn't necessarily base our decisions, at least not entirely, on neighbor support or opposition. But unlike the previous case where you had overwhelming neighborhood support, it's the exact opposite on this one. It's overwhelmingly the neighborhood's opposed to it. So that's part of the reason why for the basis of the denial.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Hagan, second by Commissioner Smith for denial of G3. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Okay, Mr. Moretti.
This brings us to item J1. This is a commissioner item regarding a direction to staff for an LDC amendment.
Commissioner Smith, you recognize.
Thank you. Yes, board members, this item is simply asking for this board to allow the staff to work with me on a proposal for a relatively minor amendment to the land development code. So at this point, I'm simply asking for you to allow this idea to move through the process with all the other land development code amendments that are coming through the pipeline. And that process will include, if you support directing staff to let us move forward with this proposal, then it would go through a stakeholder meeting, a planning commission review, a public hearing at the planning commission, and 2 public hearings here at this board. Our final public hearing would be October 24th. So we would have a public hearing September 26th, then the planning commission would hear it October 14th, and then it would come back to us for a final hearing October 24th. And what the idea is that is still just asking for permission to work through would be a small revision to a footnote in the land development code to address the situation that has come before us a couple of times lately when an RV park is on land that the comprehensive plan designates as 2 per acre, but the RV park is allowed to have 12 per acre under certain conditions. And I just want to refine those conditions to limit the density bonus given to these projects when they're outside the urban service area or have no public water and sewer services. You might keep in mind that in those cases, when there's no public sewer, the RV park needs to supply their own privately operated septic system, and those can be very, very problematic, especially when they're on wetlands or rivers. If you look, as I have through the EPC pollution violation spreadsheets, the vast bulk of pollution violations are these kinds of RV parks. And so I want to just get your support to move forward with a proposed land development code amendment.
Well, she didn't make a motion yet.
That's my motion too. The motion's on the agenda. Is to direct staff to prepare a land development code amendment for board consideration, limiting the density bonus for RV parks outside the urban service area or where urban services are unavailable. And it pertains to land development code section 6.11.110 C footnote 1.
Now, that's a motion. There's a second by Commissioner Kemp to do whatever she wants to do. See no further discussion, please record your vote.
Motion carried 7-0.
Is any other business come before us?
That concludes the agenda for the day. Thank
Mr.
you.
Merman, you trying to?
I'm sorry.
Hello, folks.
I've been getting a lot of complaints about Airbnbs. Now, I know that state law preempts us from being able to regulate them, but what I'd like to ask our attorney to just research to see if there is anything we can do. We actually had a drive-by shooting on one, and I'm telling you, and they're just going into neighborhoods, calm, peaceful neighborhoods and people are sending me these emails. You probably have gotten some copies, but they're in my district, and I just feel like if there's anything we can do, we need to research it, and hopefully they'll come back to this board. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner, I understand that direction, and I believe we can accommodate that with some further research on the regulatory options.
Good, thanks.
Commissioner Smith, you recognize.
Thank you. I would very much like to work with you on this because I had one next door to me. So I have a lot of insight into some of the issues. Thank you.
They're not coming to my neighborhood, so.
They're all over mine.
See no further discussion, adjourned.